The silver band around Jake Morrison's temple felt cold against his skin as he stepped off the transport ship onto the crystal platform of Vexstar Prime. The device had been part of his life for so long that he barely noticed it anymore. But today something felt different. The Galactic Harmony Council's grand amphitheater stretched out before him like a massive bowl carved from living crystal, its walls reaching up so high that the top disappeared into misty clouds. Jake adjusted his formal diplomatic robes and checked his reflection in the polished surface of a nearby pillar. The silver band caught the strange blue light of the alien sun and gleamed back at him. Every human who served on council business wore one of these civility dampeners. The alien races had insisted on them when humanity first joined the council 37 years ago. They said humans were too emotional, too unpredictable, too dangerous without proper control. Dr. Lisa Park walked beside him, her own dampener barely visible beneath her short brown hair. She carried a datapad filled with research about the various alien species they would encounter during this session. Lisa had spent the last 5 years studying xenobiology and could speak 12 different alien languages, though the universal translators made that skill less important than it used to be. Commander Ryan Cole brought up the rear of their small group, his military training evident in the way he scanned their surroundings for potential threats. His dampener seemed to gleam brighter than the others, as if it had to work harder to keep his natural soldier instincts under control. Ryan had given up his position in Earth's defense forces to serve as their security liaison, though his job was mostly ceremonial these days. The three humans made their way through the vast halls of the council building, passing delegates from hundreds of different worlds. Some walked on legs like humans, others floated in gravity bubbles, and a few moved through the air on gossamer wings that sparkled in the artificial light. The diversity was breathtaking, but Jake had learned to appreciate it with the calm detachment that his dampener provided. They passed a group of tall, elegant beings with skin like polished marble. These were the Seraphians, one of the oldest races in the galaxy. Their representative, a being called Veltar, nodded politely to Jake as they walked by. The gesture seemed friendly enough, but something in the alien's large silver eyes made Jake feel uncomfortable in a way he couldn't quite name. The Andromedian delegate stood near a fountain that played with liquid light instead of water. Her species looked almost human except for the extra pair of arms and the way their skin changed color based on their emotions. Right now, her skin showed swirls of deep purple, which Jake's training told him indicated mild annoyance or impatience. As they entered the main assembly hall, Jake felt the familiar weight of being the newest and least important members of this ancient gathering. Humanity had been granted junior membership status only after agreeing to strict conditions. The dampeners were just one part of those conditions. Humans could attend council sessions, but they could not vote on major issues. They could speak, but only when invited to do so. They could propose new ideas, but only after 3 other species had approved the proposals first. The session began with the traditional greeting, ceremonies that took nearly 2 hours to complete. Each species had their own ritual way of acknowledging the others, and skipping any of them would be considered a grave insult. Jake found himself going through the motions with the patient calm that his dampener provided, though somewhere deep in his mind he felt like he should be more frustrated by the endless formalities. When the actual business finally began, it was just as slow and careful as the ceremonies. The first item on the agenda was a trade dispute between the crystal-dwelling Vextari and the gas-breathing Nephians over mining rights in a distant star system. The discussion went on for hours, with each side presenting their case with elaborate courtesy and formal language that said very little of actual substance. Jake watched it all with interest, but without the burning curiosity he remembered having as a younger man. The dampener made everything seem manageable, reasonable, worth patient consideration. When his turn came to speak about humanity's modest proposals for expanding cultural exchange programs, he delivered his prepared remarks with careful politeness and appropriate deference to the older, wiser species around him. Dr. Lisa Park presented her research on alien agricultural techniques that might benefit developing worlds. Her voice was steady and calm as she explained complex biological processes, though Jake noticed her hands shake slightly when she had to wait for permission to continue speaking. Commander Ryan Cole gave a brief report on security arrangements for the next trade summit, his military background evident only in his precise word choice and efficient delivery. Throughout the day, Jake found himself noticing things that bothered him in ways he couldn't quite understand. The way some delegates whispered to each other when humans were speaking, the slight delays in translation that seemed to happen only when humans asked questions, the seating arrangement that placed Earth's delegation in the back corner farthest from the center of power during a break between sessions. Jake overheard part of a conversation between two Zephyrian delegates. Their translator seemed to be malfunctioning because their words came through in fragments: human problem and containment protocols and eventual solution. When Jake approached to ask if he could help with their technical difficulties, they quickly switched to their native language and moved away. Dr. Park noticed similar odd behaviors during her meetings with the Science Council. Alien researchers who had been friendly and collaborative in previous sessions seemed distant and guarded. When she asked about access to certain databases that had been open to her before, she was told that new security protocols required additional clearances that might take several months to process. Commander Cole reported his own concerns during their private evening meeting in the human quarters. He had observed what looked like enhanced security measures around the council building, though no one had mentioned any specific threats. Guard rotations had been changed, new scanning devices had been installed at key entry points, and several areas that used to be open to all delegates were now restricted. The three humans discussed these observations with the calm, analytical approach that their dampeners encouraged. Everything could probably be explained by routine bureaucratic changes or simple miscommunications. There was no need to jump to dramatic conclusions or let emotions cloud their judgment. The devices on their temples made sure of that, but even through the artificial calm, Jake found himself remembering what it felt like to experience unfiltered concern, real suspicion, the kind of urgent worry that demanded immediate action. Those feelings seemed like distant memories now, like recollections from someone else's life. Sometimes he wondered what he might notice or understand if he could think without the gentle restrictions that kept his mind so carefully controlled. As the first day of the council session ended, Jake looked out through the crystal walls at the strange alien stars above Vexstar Prime. Somewhere out there was Earth, with its blue skies and familiar constellations. He missed it with the mild, manageable longing that his dampener allowed him to feel. The homesickness was real but muted, like all his emotions these days. The silver band around his temple hummed softly as he prepared for sleep, ensuring that even his dreams would be calm and reasonable. The emergency alert came through on the third day of the council session, cutting through the morning's scheduled debate about agricultural subsidies for developing worlds. Jake Morrison felt his dampener pulse slightly as it automatically adjusted his emotional response to the sudden change. Instead of the sharp spike of alarm he might have experienced naturally, he felt only a mild increase in attention and focus. The message scrolled across the central display in the council chamber in 17 different languages simultaneously. Ships had gone missing in the Keth Nebula region. 3 colonies had stopped responding to communications. Long-range sensors detected massive energy signatures moving through that sector of space. The data was fragmentary and confusing, but one word appeared in every report that managed to get through: DVOURERS. Dr. Lisa Park leaned forward in her seat, her dampener working to contain what Jake suspected would normally be intense scientific curiosity. She had studied historical records of the Devourers during her xenorchaeology research. They were ancient machines, older than most of the current galactic civilizations, and had been dormant for so long that many species considered them extinct or mythical. The eldest counselor, a crystalline being whose age was measured in geological epochs, rose slowly from his position at the center of the amphitheater. His translated voice carried the weight of countless centuries as he addressed the assembly. The situation required careful study and measured response. Committees would be formed to investigate the reports. Sub-panels would evaluate the credibility. of the data. Task forces would be organized to develop preliminary recommendations for potential future actions. Jake found himself nodding along with the eldest counselor's words, his dampener ensuring that he appreciated the wisdom of careful deliberation. But somewhere beneath the artificial calm, he felt a growing sense that careful deliberation might not be the right approach. When colonies were disappearing and ancient death machines were stirring to life, Commander Ryan Cole shifted uncomfortably in his seat as the debate continued. His military background told him that speed of response was crucial in any crisis, but his dampener kept that urgency at a manageable level. He had access to Earth's military databases and knew that human tactical doctrine emphasized rapid assessment and immediate action when facing unknown threats. The Council's approach seemed designed to minimize risk to their own positions rather than address the actual danger. As the hours passed, more reports filtered in through the emergency communication networks. The colony on Theta Meridian had transmitted a final desperate message before going silent. The automated defense platforms around Kepler Station had engaged something massive and then simply vanished from all sensors. Commercial shipping through 3 major trade routes had been suspended after vessels started disappearing without any distress signals. The Seraphian delegate, Veltar, spoke eloquently about the need for verification before taking any dramatic actions. The Andromedian representative agreed that hasty responses often created more problems than they solved. The Vorthan military advisors suggested that any threat capable of affecting multiple star systems simultaneously was probably beyond the scope of conventional defensive measures. Anyway, Jake watched the debate with growing frustration that his dampener worked constantly to suppress. Each speaker seemed more concerned with maintaining their species' reputation for wisdom and caution than with actually responding to what appeared to be a genuine crisis. The formal protocols that governed council discussions meant that every statement had to be acknowledged by at least 3 other delegates before the next speaker could be recognized. Dr. Park had been quietly accessing historical databases through her personal tablet, cross-referencing current reports with ancient records of devourer activity. Her research painted a terrifying picture of machine intelligences that could strip entire worlds of all technology and biological life in a matter of hours. The last confirmed devourer awakening had occurred over 2,000 years ago and had required the combined efforts of dozens of species to contain. When Lisa tried to share her findings with the Council, she was informed that any new research would need to be submitted to the appropriate subcommittee for review and verification. The process typically took several weeks, assuming the research met the necessary standards for inclusion in official deliberations. Her dampener kept her from expressing the full force of her frustration, but Jake could see her hands clenching and unclenching as she struggled with the artificial restraints on her natural urgency. Commander Cole had spent the afternoon reviewing the Council's defensive capabilities and coordination protocols. What he found was not encouraging. The various species maintained separate military forces with incompatible communication systems and conflicting command structures. There was no unified response plan for galaxy-wide threats because the Council had never believed such threats were possible in the modern era. The ancient species that dominated Council leadership had grown comfortable with their technological superiority over younger civilizations. Their weapons were more advanced, their defenses more sophisticated, their strategies refined by millennia of experience. The idea that something could threaten their carefully ordered galaxy seemed almost impossible for them to accept. During the evening recess, Jake found himself walking through the Council building's observation galleries, looking out at the alien stars through massive crystal windows. His dampener maintained his calm appreciation for the beauty of the scene, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important. The device on his temple hummed softly, adjusting his brain chemistry to keep his thoughts orderly and his emotions controlled. Dr. Park joined him at the windows, her own dampener glowing faintly in the reflected starlight. She spoke quietly about her research, explaining how the historical patterns suggested that the devourers always began their campaigns by eliminating communication. networks and isolated outposts before moving on to major population centers? If her analysis was correct, the attacks they were hearing about now were just the beginning of something much larger. Commander Cole appeared beside them, moving with the quiet efficiency that his military training had ingrained in him. He had been monitoring emergency frequencies and picking up fragmentary reports from the frontier regions. Ships were fleeing inward toward the core worlds, bringing refugees and scattered accounts of technological horrors that consumed everything. In their path, the three humans stood together in the gallery, looking out at the peaceful alien stars, each struggling with thoughts and concerns that their dampeners worked constantly to moderate. Jake found himself wondering what they would be feeling right now without the devices. Would they be panicked? Angry? Desperate to take action? The artificial calm made it impossible to know what their natural responses might be. The next morning brought worse news. An entire star system had gone dark overnight. The Vextari monitoring stations detected massive gravitational disturbances suggesting that something had actually consumed the system's primary star. Energy readings indicated that whatever was responsible was continuing to grow larger and more powerful as it absorbed matter and energy from its targets. The Council's response was to form an additional committee to study the formation of a task force that would eventually be responsible for developing preliminary response strategies. The eldest counselor spoke at length about the importance of avoiding hasty decisions that might escalate the situation unnecessarily. Several delegates expressed concern that overreacting to unconfirmed reports might create panic among the civilian populations. Jake felt his dampener surge slightly as it worked to contain his growing sense of disbelief. The ancient civilizations that ruled the galaxy were treating an existential threat like a routine administrative problem. Their confidence in their own superiority had blinded them to the possibility that something might exist that their careful deliberations could not handle. Dr. Park had given up trying to present her research through official channels and was quietly sharing her findings with individual delegates during breaks between sessions. Most listened politely but seemed more interested in maintaining protocol than in understanding the historical precedents she had uncovered. Her dampener kept her scientific frustration at manageable levels, but Jake could see the strain in her eyes as she struggled against the artificial constraints. Commander Cole had begun mapping the council building's security systems and emergency procedures, a habit from his military days that his dampener couldn't completely suppress. What he found worried him in ways that the device on his temple couldn't entirely calm. The ancient aliens had designed their defenses to handle conventional threats from other civilized species, not something that might operate by completely different rules. As the second day of crisis management concluded with another series of committee formations and procedural discussions, Jake stood once again at the crystal windows of the observation gallery. The stars looked the same as they had the night before, but he knew that some of them might no longer exist. The thought should have filled him with horror or desperation, but his dampener ensured that he felt only a mild sense of concern and a carefully modulated. The electromagnetic pulse hit Vexstar Prime at exactly 14:27 Galactic Standard Time on the fifth day of the council session. Jake Morrison was standing at the speaker's podium, delivering a carefully worded proposal for increased intelligence gathering in the affected sectors. When every piece of technology in the amphitheater began to spark and flicker, the silver band around Jake's temple grew suddenly hot, then cold, then began to vibrate with an uncomfortable buzzing sensation. He paused mid-sentence as warning. Lights flashed throughout the crystal chamber, and emergency systems activated with piercing alarms. The massive holographic displays that showed real-time galactic communications flickered and went dark one by one. Dr. Lisa Park felt her dampener overload during her presentation to the Xenobiology Subcommittee. The device had been working overtime to suppress her natural scientific curiosity and growing frustration with the Council's slow response to the crisis. When the pulse surge overwhelmed its circuits, the sudden absence of artificial control hit her like a physical shock. For the first time in years, her mind operated without filters or restraints. Commander Ryan Cole was reviewing security protocols in the human quarters when his dampener failed completely. The device sparked once, flickered, and went permanently. Dark, the change was immediate and overwhelming. His tactical awareness, dulled by years of artificial calm, snapped back to full intensity. Every sound became potentially significant, every shadow a possible threat, every exit route mapped and evaluated in seconds. Throughout the amphitheater, the electromagnetic interference played havoc with alien technology as well. The universal translators that allowed hundreds of species to communicate began producing garbled output, mixing languages and sometimes revealing conversations that were meant to remain private. The elegant Seraphian delegate's words came through in fragments, but Jake could hear enough to understand: useful animals and breeding problem and eventual sterilization. The Andromedian representative's skin shifted through rapid color changes as her emotional control systems malfunctioned, revealing the deep contempt she had been hiding behind diplomatic courtesy. Her translator caught phrases like primitive, mammals, and necessary elimination before cutting out entirely. Jake felt anger building in his chest. Real human anger unfiltered by artificial controls, as more and more alien conversations became audible through the failing translation networks. The Vorthan delegates were discussing containment protocols and final solutions, while the ancient Zephyrian counselors spoke of humans as a temporary necessity that would soon outlive their usefulness. The eldest counselor's crystalline form resonated with harmonic frequencies as his own. Communication systems struggled with the interference. His voice, when it came through the damaged translators, carried none of the careful diplomatic language Jake had grown accustomed to. Instead, the ancient being spoke with casual dismissal about the human experiment and how the current crisis might provide an opportunity to resolve multiple problems simultaneously. Dr. Park moved through the chaos with sudden clarity, her undampened mind processing information at speeds that surprised even her. The electromagnetic pulse hadn't been random interference from the Devourer attacks. The energy signature matched the resonance frequency of Vexstar Prime's crystal matrix, suggesting that the pulse had been deliberately tuned to affect this specific world. Someone or something had wanted to disrupt the Council's technology at precisely this moment. Commander Cole was already moving, his military training fully active for the first time in years. He assessed the security situation with cold efficiency, noting that the alien guards were confused and disoriented by their own technological failures. Their weapons relied on sophisticated targeting systems that were now offline, and their communication networks had been reduced to short-range audio only. The three humans found each other in the chaos, drawn together by instincts that their dampeners had suppressed for years. They moved with fluid coordination, communicating through glances and gestures in the way that humans had evolved to do in crisis situations. Without the artificial restraints that had dulled their responses, they began to see patterns and possibilities that the aliens around them were missing. Jake's diplomatic training, enhanced rather than hindered by his natural emotional intelligence, allowed him to read the political situation with startling clarity. The various alien species weren't just dismissive of humanity. They were actively planning to eliminate humans as soon as the current crisis was resolved. The dampeners hadn't been a condition of membership in the galactic community. They had been a method of keeping humanity passive while their eventual fate was decided. Dr. Park's scientific mind, freed from artificial constraints, began connecting disparate pieces of information at an exponential rate. The Devourer attacks weren't random, and they weren't following the historical patterns she had studied. Someone was directing them, using the ancient machines as a tool to reshape the galaxy according to their own agenda. The electromagnetic pulse that had disabled their dampeners might have been intended to reveal the true nature of galactic politics at precisely the moment when humanity would be most vulnerable. Commander Cole's tactical assessment was grimmer than his companions realized. The Council's security forces were more than just ceremonial guards. They were positioned to contain and, if necessary, eliminate any delegates who became too difficult to control. The human quarters were isolated from the main building by choke points that could be easily sealed. Their ship, the New Dawn, was under constant surveillance and could be disabled or destroyed without warning. As the emergency systems gradually restored basic lighting and communication throughout the amphitheater, Jake found himself facing a choice that would have been impossible. While his dampener was functioning, he could pretend that the device was still working, continue playing the role of a docile junior member of the galactic community, and hope that Earth might somehow survive whatever plans the alien species had for humanity's future, or he could acknowledge that everything had changed, that the artificial politeness and careful deference that had characterized human participation in galactic affairs had been a lie from the beginning. The aliens didn't see humans as partners or even as equals. They saw them as a problem to be managed and eventually solved. The translator networks flickered back to life, and the careful diplomatic language resumed as alien delegates realized that their private conversations had been overheard. But it was too late. Jake had heard enough to understand the true nature of humanity's situation, and his undampened mind was already formulating responses that would have been impossible under artificial control. Dr. Park moved to his side, her eyes bright with the kind of intense focus that had made her a brilliant scientist before the dampeners muted her natural curiosity. She spoke quietly but urgently about what she had discovered in the moments of chaos. The Devourer attacks were accelerating, but more importantly, they were following a pattern that suggested coordination with someone inside the Council itself. Commander Cole joined them, his bearing subtly different now that his military instincts were fully engaged. He reported security vulnerabilities that he had mapped over the past several days, escape routes that might remain viable, and defensive positions that could be held if the situation deteriorated further. His assessment was that they had perhaps minutes rather than hours before the alien delegates realized that the human dampeners had failed completely. Jake looked around the amphitheater at the hundreds of alien delegates who were slowly returning to their seats and resuming the pretense of civilized deliberation. Many of them were staring at the human delegation with expressions that ranged from curiosity to concern to barely concealed hostility. The eldest counselor's crystalline form pulsed with harmonics that Jake's training told him indicated deep displeasure and growing suspicion. The choice was simple. Even if the consequences were terrifying, they could continue the charade and hope for the best, or they could act on what they had learned while they still had the freedom to do so. The dampeners had kept them passive and compliant for years, but they were human beings, not pets or prisoners. They had minds and wills and the right to determine their own fate. Jake Morrison touched his dead dampener one last time, feeling the cool metal that had controlled his thoughts and emotions for so long. Then he stood and walked toward the speakers' podium, his undampened mind clear and focused for the first time in years. He had something to say to the Galactic Harmony Council, and this time he was going to say it without artificial restraints or diplomatic filters. The ancient aliens wanted to see what humans were really like without their careful controls. They were about to find out. Jake Morrison walked to the center of the amphitheater without asking for permission, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence that fell over the assembled delegates. The ancient protocols that governed council proceedings had never included provisions for junior members taking initiative, and the alien representatives watched with growing alarm as the human ignored every rule of diplomatic courtesy they had spent decades drilling into him. The eldest counselor's crystalline form pulsed with agitated harmonics as Jake reached the speaker's platform. Through the partially functioning translators, his voice carried undertones of displeasure and confusion. No human had ever interrupted council proceedings before, and the violation of protocol sent ripples of shock through species that measured stability and geological timescales. Jake looked out at the hundreds of alien faces, some familiar from years of careful diplomatic interaction, others belonging to species so ancient they remembered when humanity's sun was still forming. Without his dampener filtering his emotions and thoughts, he could see them clearly for the first time. Not as wise elder civilizations to be respected and obeyed, but as stagnant powers protecting their positions while the galaxy burned around them. "You're all going to die," Jake said, his voice carrying clearly through the amphitheater without the careful modulation that diplomatic training had taught him. The words cut through millennia of formal procedure like a blade through silk. Dr. Lisa Park had spent the last few minutes accessing the Council's central databases through emergency terminals that the electromagnetic pulse had left unsecured. Her undampened mind processed information with a clarity and speed that amazed her, making connections between seemingly unrelated data points that painted a terrifying picture of the galaxy's true situation. The Devourer attacks weren't following random patterns. They were systematically eliminating species that possessed specific technological capabilities, working their way through a target list that someone had prepared in advance. More disturbing was the discovery that several council members had been quietly relocating their civilian populations to heavily defended core worlds weeks before the attacks began. Commander Ryan Cole moved through the amphitheater's security checkpoints with efficient precision, his military training fully engaged for the first time in years. The alien guards were still struggling with their malfunctioning equipment, and Cole exploited their confusion to access restricted areas and communication networks. What he found confirmed his worst suspicions about humanity's true status in the galactic community. The human quarters weren't just diplomatically isolated. They were designed as a containment facility. The exits could be sealed remotely. The life support systems could be controlled from external sources, and the entire section could be jettisoned from the main structure if necessary. Earth's delegation hadn't been guests at the council sessions. They had been prisoners awaiting sentence. Jake continued speaking, his words stripping away the polite fiction that had governed human-alien relations for decades. The Devourers aren't following your playbook. They're not going to wait while you form committees to study the formation of task forces to consider preliminary response options. Dr. Park has identified their attack pattern. Commander Cole has developed strategies that might actually work, and I'm done asking permission to save your lives. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Delegates from dozens of species erupted in outrage at this unprecedented breach of protocol. The Seraphian representative demanded that the humans be removed from the chamber for their violation of civilized discourse. The Andromedian delegate's skin flashed through angry color, patterns as she called for security forces to restore order, but Dr. Park was already moving, her scientific mind operating with the fluid adaptability that had made humanity successful. Despite being the galaxy's newest species, she had identified weaknesses in the Council's information networks that years of dampened thinking had prevented her from exploiting. With her natural curiosity and pattern recognition fully engaged, she began accessing classified databases that revealed the true scope of the crisis. The Devourer fleet was massive, far larger than any of the public reports had indicated. They had already consumed 17 star systems and were accelerating their advance toward the galaxy's core worlds. More terrifying was the discovery that their technology was adapting and evolving with each system they absorbed, becoming more efficient and more deadly as they learned from their conquests. Commander Cole had reached the Council's central communication hub, where he discovered that the building's defensive systems were more sophisticated than their external appearance suggested. The ancient aliens had concealed weapons that could level continents and shields that could withstand direct stellar bombardment. But all of these systems were designed to fight conventional enemies using predictable tactics. The three humans coordinated their actions with an instinctive efficiency that their dampeners had suppressed for years. Jake held the Council's attention with speeches that violated every rule of diplomatic engagement, speaking with the direct honesty that humans used when survival was at stake. His words were harsh and uncompromising, but they carried a clarity that cut through layers of bureaucratic confusion. Dr. Park fed him real-time intelligence about the Devourer advance, information that the Council's own intelligence services had either missed or deliberately concealed. Her analysis revealed tactical opportunities that the alien military commanders had overlooked, weaknesses in the enemy formations that could be exploited by forces willing to take calculated risks. Commander Cole worked to secure their escape routes and communication channels, knowing that their window of opportunity was rapidly closing. The alien security forces were adapting to their equipment failures, and soon they would move to contain the humans who had so dramatically violated the established order. Jake's speech reached its climax as he outlined the choice facing the galactic community. You can continue your careful deliberations while star systems burn, or you can follow human tactical recommendations and have a chance of survival. Any species that wants to live through the next week should start taking orders from Earth's delegation immediately. The amphitheater erupted in chaos as delegates shouted in hundreds of different languages. The universal translators, still functioning poorly after the electromagnetic pulse, created a cacophony of conflicting voices and incomplete sentences. Through the noise, Jake could hear fragments of alien conversations that revealed the true depth of their contempt for humanity and their shock at being challenged by what they considered a lesser species. Dr. Park had found what she was looking for in the deepest archives of the Council's historical databases. Ancient weapons that had been banned for being too destructive, defensive technologies that had been deemed too dangerous for civilized use, tactical doctrines that violated the careful rules of engagement that governed galactic warfare. The aliens had the tools to fight the Devourers, but their own civilized restraints prevented them from using those tools effectively. Commander Cole returned to report that their time was running out. Security forces were moving to surround the human delegation, and several species had called for emergency sessions to discuss the human crisis that now overshadowed even the Devourer threat. The ancient aliens were more concerned with maintaining their authority than with actual survival. Jake looked out at the assembled delegates, many of whom were calling for his immediate arrest for breach of protocol. His undampened mind saw them clearly now, not as wise elder civilizations, but as bureaucratic fossils whose reverence for procedure had become a fatal weakness. They had the knowledge and technology to defeat the Devourers, but they lacked the will to use them effectively. "This is what humans are like without your controls," Jake said, his voice carrying clearly through the chaos. "We adapt, we improvise. We find solutions that violate your rules because your rules are killing you. You wanted us to be civilized. Congratulations, now you get to see what uncivilized humans can accomplish." Dr. Park joined him at the podium, her arms full of data, tablets containing information that could save billions of lives if anyone was willing to listen. Commander Cole took position nearby, his military bearing making it clear that he was prepared to defend their position against any attempt to silence them. The three humans stood together in the center of the galactic community's most sacred assembly, their dampeners dark and silent, their minds operating with the full intensity that had lifted their species from a single world to membership in an interstellar civilization. They had been kept passive and controlled for decades, but that time was over. The polite mode had malfunctioned, and the galaxy was about to discover what humans were really capable of when their survival instincts were fully engaged. The ancient aliens had wanted to see humanity's true nature. They were about to get their wish, and the results would reshape the balance of power among the stars. The Council's security forces moved with ceremonial precision that had not been tested in actual combat for thousands of years. Commander Ryan Cole watched them approach through the amphitheater's main entrances and felt something he had not experienced since his dampener was installed: the cold clarity of battlefield awareness. These aliens had grown soft during their long peace, and their weapons were designed more for display than for actual fighting. Cole moved with fluid efficiency, using furniture and architectural features as cover while he neutralized the guards, with techniques that his military training had never forgotten. The aliens fell with surprised expressions, their sophisticated weapons useless against an opponent who fought with speed and improvisation rather than formal doctrine. Within minutes, the human delegation controlled the central platform of the galaxy's most important governing body. Dr. Lisa Park had taken control of the Council's central computer systems, her undampened mind processing information and making connections at speeds that surprised even her. The electromagnetic pulse had left security protocols in chaos, and she exploited every weakness with the relentless creativity that had made humanity a successful species despite their late arrival on the galactic stage. her research revealed the locations of ancient weapon caches that the Council had hidden throughout their territory. Devices too powerful and too dangerous for civilized warfare, locked away by species that preferred elegant solutions to effective ones. More importantly, she had identified the source of the Devour coordination signals and traced them to a location that would shock the assembled delegates. Jake Morrison stood at the speaker's podium, his voice carrying clearly through the amphitheater. As he addressed the galaxy directly through the Council's emergency broadcast systems, the careful diplomatic language that had characterized his speeches for years was gone, replaced by the direct honesty that humans used when everything was at stake. This is Ambassador Jake Morrison of Earth speaking to every world that can receive this transmission. The Galactic Harmony Council has no plan that will save you from the Devourers. Your leaders are more concerned with maintaining their authority than with your survival. We have a strategy that might work, but it requires you to follow human tactical commands immediately. The response was immediate and chaotic. Half the galaxy erupted in outrage at the unprecedented violation of protocol, while the other half desperately asked for instructions as more star systems went dark. Jake could hear the panic in their voices as species that had lived in peaceful stability for millennia suddenly faced extinction. Dr. Park fed him real-time tactical data as she coordinated with military commanders across dozens of worlds. The Devourers had evolved beyond their historical patterns, adapting to every conventional strategy the aliens attempted. But their machine intelligence, for all its sophistication, could not predict the chaotic creativity that characterized human problem-solving approaches. Commander Cole had secured the amphitheater and was directing the evacuation of non-essential personnel while coordinating defensive positions. His military mind, freed from artificial restraints, saw tactical opportunities that years of dampened thinking had hidden from him. The Council building itself could be converted into a fortress, its hidden defensive systems activated for the first time in living memory. The alien delegates found themselves in the unprecedented position of being protected by the very humans they had planned to eliminate. Some species accepted the new reality with pragmatic resignation, while others continued to demand that proper protocols be observed even as reports of system-wide destruction continued to pour in through emergency channels. Jake outlined humanity's strategy with brutal efficiency. The elegant defensive lines that the aliens favored would be abandoned in favor of mobile tactics that kept the Devourers guessing. Ancient weapons would be deployed despite their violation of civilized warfare conventions. Most shocking to the assembled aliens, different species would be required to share their most closely guarded technologies and fight. Alongside traditional enemies, the Seraphians were ordered to provide their shield technology to species they considered inferior. The Vorthans found themselves taking tactical commands from humans they had dismissed as barely sentient. Ancient grudges and territorial disputes were set aside as Jake's undampened mind cut through millennia of diplomatic complexity with simple survival mathematics. Dr. Park had made a discovery that changed everything. The Devour coordination signals were not coming from the ancient machines themselves, but from a hidden facility in the Andromeda Galaxy operated by a faction of the Council itself. A group of the oldest alien species had decided that the galaxy needed to be cleansed of younger civilizations, and they were using the Devourers as their weapon of choice. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembly as Park presented her evidence. Species that had trusted each other for thousands of years suddenly faced the possibility that their oldest allies had been planning their destruction. The careful bonds of galactic civilization began to unravel as suspicion and fear replaced diplomatic courtesy. Jake used the chaos to push through military coordination that would have taken months to negotiate under normal circumstances. Human tactical doctrine was implemented across dozens of fleets as species that had never worked together found themselves fighting side by side under Earth's strategic command. The battle against the Devourers became a test of everything that made humanity unique in the galaxy. Where alien strategies were elegant and predictable, human approaches were chaotic and adaptive. Cole coordinated surprise attacks that violated every principle of civilized warfare. but proved devastatingly effective against machine intelligence. That learned from patterns, Park's scientific mind identified weaknesses in Devourer technology that the aliens had missed, exploit points where human creativity could turn the machine's own adaptive capabilities against them. Jake's diplomatic skills, enhanced rather than hindered by his emotional honesty, held together a coalition that included species with millions of years of mutual distrust. The turning point came when Cole realized that the Devourer's greatest strength could become their weakness. The machines learned from every encounter, adapting their strategies based on observed patterns. But human tactics deliberately avoided patterns, embracing chaos and unpredictability as strategic advantages, working with Park's analysis of machine behavior and Jake's coordination of multi-species forces. Cole designed a campaign that fed the Devourer's false information. The machines adapted to counter threats that did not exist, leaving them vulnerable to attacks they could not anticipate. The victory was costly but complete. The Devourer fleet, confused by contradictory data and unable to adapt to truly random tactics, began to make critical errors. Ancient machines that had survived for millions of years found themselves outmaneuvered by strategies that violated every principle of logical warfare. As the last Devourer signals faded from galactic sensors, Jake Morrison stood once again before the Galactic Harmony Council. The amphitheater was different now, marked by battle damage and filled with delegates who looked at humanity with expressions ranging from grudging respect to open fear. Jake removed his dead dampener and placed it carefully on the speaker's podium. The gesture was simple, but its meaning was clear to everyone present. Humanity withdraws from junior membership status, he announced. We're prepared to remain as equal partners in the galactic community, but we're done being your controlled pets. The dampeners are discontinued permanently, or we leave and you handle the next crisis on your own. The debate that followed was fierce but brief. Too many species remembered the burning systems and the Council's inadequate response. 2. Many had seen what happened when human creativity was allowed to operate without artificial restraints. The vote was closer than Jake would have liked, but it was decisive. Dr. Park was appointed to head a new crisis response center that would operate outside the traditional committee structure. Commander Cole became the Council's first human security coordinator with authority to implement emergency protocols that bypassed normal diplomatic channels. Jake himself was granted the new position of human representative, with full voting rights and the authority to speak for Earth in all Council proceedings. The galaxy was still vast and full of wonders, but humanity no longer had to experience it through the filter of artificial controls. The careful politeness that had characterized human participation in galactic affairs was replaced by honest partnership based on mutual respect rather than forced compliance. Jake looked out at the assembled aliens and felt something he had not experienced in years: genuine pride in what his species had accomplished. They had saved a galaxy that had planned to destroy them, and they had done it by being fully human rather than controlled approximations of what other species thought they should be. The polite mode was permanently disabled, and the stars themselves seemed brighter for it.